quotes, so they're going to be important. Now, if I'm marking up 80% of the text page after page, that's a huge problem. But on page 1, with things like the title and the introductory quotes, I'm going to be okay with that for now. All right, this chapter is about heroification, a degenerative process much like calcification that makes people over into heroes. Okay. All right. So, let's see here. I've got heroification. Heroification. That looks like it's going to be an important word. I'm going to highlight that. Let me highlight that a little more clearly. Heroification. Where is it? Okay. And I'm also going to do the thing where I underline. And so I'm going to say this chapter is about heroification, which is, and then I'm going to bracket it, a degenerative process that makes people over into heroes. And I'm actually going to make myself a note here. And the note is going to be DEF. I always write DEF next to a definition. Okay? So that's the definition of heroification. So heroification is a process, a degenerative process much like calcification that makes people over into heroes. Now, I'm not totally sure what calcification means, so I'm going to take a pause here and I'm going to look it up real quick. Okay, so it looks like calcification has to do with the hardening of cells in your body, and it's a bad thing, hence the word degenerative. So the chapter is about heroification, which is a degenerative process much like calcification that makes people over into heroes, okay? So heroification is essentially a process where a great thing becomes less great by turning somebody into a hero. So he's saying heroification is bad. The process of making a person a hero is bad, right? So if I had more room in the margin, or specifically, I guess more specifically, if I had a smaller pen than my iPad stylus, the note that I might make would be something like person into hero equals bad, okay? And I already have a sense of why it might be bad from the quotes that he's already chosen to use, right? So about how, for example, when you make somebody a hero, then you don't try to emulate them. So I know heroification to him is a bad thing, okay? I am going to erase that note just for the sake of being able to use this screen more efficiently. But again, if that was my real margin, that note would stay there, okay? This chapter is about heroification, a degenerative process much like calcification that makes people over into heroes. Through this process, our educational media turn flesh and blood individuals into pious, perfect creatures without conflicts, pain, credibility, or human interest. Okay. So when you turn someone into a hero, you turn them from a real person into a fake person. Okay. Now, notice I don't have to write that down, but that is actually what I'm thinking in my head. I'm not going to go to the next sentence until I make sure I understand that. And for me, that often means putting it in my own words, especially if it's a long sentence with a lot of words like that one. Okay, so heroification is bad, and you take a real person, you make them into a fake person. Many American history textbooks are studded with biographical vignettes of the very famous. Land of Promise devotes a box to each president. And the famous, The Challenge of Freedom, provides did you know boxes about Elizabeth Blackwell, the first woman to graduate from medical school in the United States, and Lorraine Hansberry, author of A Raisin in the Sun, among many others. Okay, so all those examples are not too important. What is important is this basic idea that he started the paragraph with. Many American history textbooks are studded with these vignettes. So textbooks are full of these little mini biographies. Okay, in themselves, vignettes are not a bad idea. They instruct. Fine. They instruct by human example. Okay, so vignettes instruct by human example. They show diverse ways that people can make a difference. They allow textbooks to give space to characters such as Blackwell and Hansberry, who relieve what would otherwise be a monolithic parade of white male political leaders. Biographical vignettes also provoke reflection as to our purpose in teaching history. Is Chester A. Arthur more deserving of space than, say, Frank Lloyd Wright? Who influences us more today? Wright, who invented the carport and transformed domestic architectural spaces, or Arthur, who signed the first Civil Service Act? Whose rise to prominence provides more drama? Blackwell's or George H.W. Bush's, the latter born with a silver Senate seat in his mouth? The choices are debatable, but surely textbooks should include some people based not only on what they achieve, but also on the distance they traverse to achieve it. Okay. So I think, you know what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to make myself a note that says discussion of bio purposes, right? Because what he's doing here is he's asking, like, why do we have these biographies of people? And he's just asking some questions. He doesn't make a specific point, he's just asking some questions. So I'm just going to put that in parentheses. That's what that paragraph's about. Now I'll remember. We could go on to third and fourth guess the list of heroes in textbook pantheons. My concern here, however, is not who gets chosen, but rather what happens to the heroes when they are introduced into our history textbooks and our classrooms. Okay, so when he says what his concern is, I know that's what this is going to be about. So my concern is not who gets chosen, but rather what happens to the heroes when they are introduced into our history textbooks and our classrooms. So he's not going to argue so much with who we pick, but he's going to say when you write a biography of somebody inside a history textbook, what are you doing with that biography? Two 20th century Americans provide case studies of heroification, Woodrow Wilson and Helen Keller. Okay, so I know he's going to talk about both of these guys, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little 1 on Woodrow Wilson. I'm going to put a 2 on Helen Keller. And when the discussions of this man Wilson and this woman Keller come up later, I can keep putting 1s and 2s next to them to help organize my reading. Wilson was unarguably an important president, and he receives extensive textbook coverage. Keller, on the other hand, was a, quote, little person who pushed through no legislation, changed the course of no scientific discipline, declared no war. Only one of all the history textbooks I surveyed includes her photograph. Most books don't even mention her, but teachers love to talk about Keller and often show audiovisual materials or recommend biographies that present her life as exemplary. All this attention ensures that students retain something about both of these historical figures, but they may be no better off for it. Heroification so distorts the lives of Keller and Wilson and many others that we cannot think straight about them. Okay. So I think this idea in these two sentences, right? So our excerpt stops here, but if I had to predict what was coming next, and of course I've read this chapter so I know what's coming next, but based on the text, he's going to say that we're not better off for what we are retaining about these people, and that heroification distorts them so that we cannot think straight about them. Okay, so I think what he's going to do is he's going to take Wilson and he's going to take Keller, and he's going to explain the how heroification distorts their legacies, right? I think that's what's coming here. Now, if we were to read further on, we'd find out a little bit more. Okay. So again, because this is in the white, I am going to erase it. Although, of course, if I had a real pen here, that would stay, and you can get a sense of what an annotated page should look like. Okay, so on this page, I've got a little bit of underlining, a couple of notes, some numbers, but as you can see, really only about 25% of the text maybe is touched, and that's what you should be probably shooting for, generally speaking. So here you see the pages side by side. There's obviously a bit more annotating on the first page, which is generally going to be the case, and a bit less on the second page. Obviously, I took a lot of time. You can't spend 10, 15 minutes on 2 pages regularly if you want to get through all of your work. But what I'm hoping is that you'll have paid very close attention to the thought process, what I'm choosing to write and what I'm choosing not to, and you'll be able to use it as a bit of a guide for yourself. I'm going to go ahead and end the presentation on annotation right here.